everyone, this is the book related video. I thought I would do my top 5 weird books because I have read a few slightly odd books and I do kind of enjoy them. It's really a very subjective term, what is weird, and I don't want this to be like a judgmental thing about the book or the author or anything. Some of these books I liked, some I didn't, and some I liked bits of but not others. I just thought they were ones that when I read them I was a bit like, wow, that's not where I thought we were going, or this is a very unusual plot point, or this makes absolutely no sense. What on earth are you talking about? So in that light I thought I would do my top 5, I keep doing two hands, top 5 weird books. I don't have all of them with me, I only have 2, so for the other ones I'll have to put a little picture in so that you can see the cover. But starting in no particular order with Ice by Anna Kavan. I'm not sure how you pronounce her name. It was a name that she gave herself. It's a character in one of her previous books, but then she started using it as her pen name. So I've got my notes to the side. So the book was published in 1967 and I did read this one for work when I worked in a shop where we were selling the book. And so I managed to read it in a day. It was quite a quiet day in the shop, so I read it whilst I was at work. It's not a super long book, but the setting or the context is that there is an impending or approaching ice age. So the world has cooled to the point where most of the world now is uninhabitable, and in fact a lot of people are heading towards the equator to have end of the world parties, because the equator area now is the most habitable and temperate place to be. So yeah, people are going for these end of the world parties because there's quite a resigned feeling in the book of the world is going to end. Within that context then, our protagonist, who is a bit of a creep, I think, and an unreliable narrator, is chasing after a woman who he once had a relationship with, who is also being pursued by someone called the Warden. It seems like the protagonist and the woman, met when she was married to another man. It was in a period of conflict. I think the other man was like a warlord or something along those lines. As with all these books, it's a little bit hard to always know exactly what's going on because the narrator is slightly unreliable, and it also seems that he is hallucinating at times. So he is driving along and he imagines her lying on the road in front of him, and her body being on the road, but that it hasn't actually happened. He visualizes like things like this, and also lots of violence against her. So he imagines like snapping her bones and breaking her bones, and there's lots of references to her being quite physically small and frail, and I just found it a bit unpleasant, to be honest. I did read that it's a feminist work, and that part was slightly lost on me. Also that it was a love story, and I did not get that. It's a very interesting work, and I did actually quite like the idea of an impending ice age, which is not quite what we're all expecting to happen at the moment, and the opposite way round. But I don't know, I found the protagonist guy quite creepy. So the next weird book on my list is Ubik by Philip K. Dick from 1969, another book from the 60s. So Philip K. Dick was a hugely prolific author. He wrote 44 novels and like 100 and something short stories. He also, by the sounds of it, took a whole lot of drugs. I think possibly Anna Kavan did as well. I don't know, maybe that's the theme of these odd books from the 1960s. Most of Dick's books were sci-fi, and quite a lot of them have been made into films. So Blade Runner was based on a book by Philip K. Dick, and Minority Report, and I can't think of any others off the top of my head. The story is set in 1992, which is only about 23 years after it was written, so it's only 23 years into the future from the perspective of the people reading it when it was published, which is not a very long amount of time given the technological advances of the people in the book Ubik. So people have colonized the moon, as they always have done in these sci-fi future stories. That's obviously where we're all heading. They've colonized the moon, psychic powers are common, and people can be kept in a half-life state after they die, when you can still have some form of like psychic connection and communication with them. But this is only 23 years after, like, into the future. So it's not a very long book again, I don't think, but the plot, like, so much stuff happens. So I don't want to spoil it, but I also don't want to spend 3 hours retelling it as well. So a very shortened version is that the protagonist, Joe Chip, finds out that his boss's wife, who has died but is being kept in this half-life state, her consciousness is being invaded by another half-lifer. Then he and a bunch of other people end up on like some kind of like, not spaceship, airship, aeroplane type thing. There's an explosion, a big explosion, a bunch of stuff happens, and then after that explosion, Joe Chip starts to experience weird shifts in reality. Things seem to be aging and decaying in particular. So oh my god. So Joe Chip finds out that there is something called Ubik, which is actually an aerosol spray that he can get that will temporarily reverse the aging and decay, but he can't get his hands on it and he doesn't know what it is. And it's not actually, I think, fully explained what Ubik is at all in the book. Philip K. Dick's widow apparently said that she thought that Ubik stood in for God. I don't know. There's so much, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the plot that I've missed out, but it's a very interesting but odd book. I do like these kind of these worlds that Philip K. Dick creates, where everything's set in the future, and people are heavily reliant on like technology. At one point in Ubik, one of the characters, I think Joe Chip, doesn't know how to walk upstairs because he's been so used to being on like sort of escalator type devices that when that fails to work, he can't figure out how to actually walk upstairs anymore. We also have a lot of themes in his books of people just being kind of disconnected and alienated from their feelings, and being you know, using all these like devices and things to not really feel genuine emotions, I guess. I quite like those books, but I will say Ubik was the weirdest one for me. And they're all quite weird. So book number 3 on our top 5 weird books is The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. This is from 1896. I am not H.G. Wells' biggest fan. I have read a couple of his books. I've read The Time Machine, and I've read... maybe I've just read these two. But I feel like he probably was quite racist and sexist. And some of those vibes do come out in the books. So this book is an interesting kind of, I guess, a body horror kind of work, so quite different from the previous two. Edward Prenwick gets shipwrecked on an island, the island of Dr. Moreau, as from the title, as you might have guessed. And he discovers Dr. Moreau and also his assistant Montgomery, and their kind of weird setup on the island. So Dr. Moreau, it transpires, is trying to create a kind of a human, I was going to say a human-animal hybrid, but that is not correct. So he is experimenting on animals, but trying to make them more human-like. So the ship that Prenwick was on when it became shipwrecked was apparently carrying a puma, a big cat. And later on in the book, Prenwick hears the cat crying out in pain and anguish whilst it's undergoing one of these experiments. He runs out into the jungle, the Prenwick, not the puma person, runs out into the jungle where he meets a bunch of people animals, the beast folk, who are living in the jungle. So the beast folk are the result of Moreau's experiments, obviously, and Moreau is trying to perfect the technique because the problem that he's having is that the beast folk keep reverting to their animal nature, which just raises the question that if you don't want your beast folk to be like animals, why would you start with animals in the first place? So I was looking this up when I was putting this list together, and so one of the themes of the book is kind of a man's relationship with nature, but also an idea of kind of a leveling up of another species, like humans interfering in another species development to like speed up their progression, I guess. Which yeah, I can kind of see that, but I don't know, it just raises so many questions as to like why you would want to do this. But then I guess all these kind of books do. I mean, when I read Frankenstein, like why would you want to reanimate a dead body in the first place? And if you can't get past that question, then maybe this isn't the genre of book for you. So maybe these aren't the books for me. Anyway, it's a interesting book. It's like an older book to read. It's one of the, I guess it's like a classic, kind of like a sci-fi fantasy kind of classic. A bit more gruesome than the average. But like I said, H.G. Wells is not really my cup of tea. Okay, so book number 4. I actually have this book. It is The Vegetarian by Han Kang. I really like this book. I really like Han Kang as well. I've read one of her other books called Human Acts, which I really liked. That one is a little bit sadder than this one. So this one was first published in Korean in 2007 and then translated in 2015. So I have the English translated copy, and so it's a much more recent book than the other ones. So The Vegetarian starts off and you think you're going in one direction and then you end up somewhere totally different. I would say this is a weird book because I did not see it coming, but I feel like that is a bit of an insulting and dismissive way of looking at this book. I don't know, I just really liked it. I remember picking it up in the bookshop and really liking how it starts. So the first line, before my wife turned vegetarian, I'd always thought of her as completely unremarkable in every way. I don't know why that appealed to me because it's just not a very nice way to describe your wife, but you know, it was a bit of a different way to describe one's wife. Anyway, so in the book, Young Hae, I think that is how you pronounce her name, apologies if not, Young Hae decides to stop eating meat and become a vegetarian after she has a series of dreams about animal slaughter. Her husband is quite unsettled and embarrassed about this, and he eventually stages an intervention. I think there is some concern as well on his part for her welfare, but there just seems to be a lot of him being embarrassed that he's not really in control of her actions. That's what I got anyway. So he kind of stages this intervention with her family where her father in particular tries to force her to eat. Her brother and her husband hold her down while her father tries to force feed her some pork. And then when she refuses and sort of fights them off, he slaps her. And she ends up actually cutting herself after that interaction. So already her mental health is also in decline at this point. I thought at this point that's what the book was going to be about. It was going to be about a woman in Korea in perhaps a more conservative, patriarchal society who was challenging the norms. So she's challenging the norms of that society by not eating meat and becoming vegetarian, but also challenging the men in the family, her husband and her father in particular. thought that's what direction we were going in, and then it just seems to turn into something else. So Young Hae is eating less and less food, and after the incident with her father, and then she cuts herself, she's admitted into hospital, and her mental state is becoming less and less stable. She is released from hospital. She's eating less and less food, and she starts to suggest that she would actually like to become a plant rather than just eat plants. Her brother-in-law is a artist who does like video work, and I mean there's a bit of a journey to get there, I suppose, but her brother-in-law decides that he would like to create some art by videoing her and one of his friends, a male artist, who are naked and have been painted all over their bodies with flowers. I don't know, I guess like dancing around and then like rolling around with each other, and they agree to do this, but what he actually is wanting, the brother-in-law is wanting for them to end up having sex together on camera. But he hasn't told them this or asked for their consent in any way. He just keeps trying to like nudge them closer and closer together. The friend realizes what's happening and leaves. Young Hae doesn't seem as upset by the idea as the male friend was, but by this point, like I said, her mental health has declined quite a bit, and you really do feel like the brother-in-law is exploiting that. He ends up painting himself naked with leaves, and they do end up having sex on camera. Ultimately, Young Hae ends up being admitted into a mental hospital where she just stops. I don't think it's a mental hospital. She might be being treated for anorexia, actually. She definitely gets admitted to a hospital where she is just refusing to eat, and so her physical and mental health is just in decline, and at that point the only person that really is coming to visit her and look after her is her sister. And so it is still interesting to, you know, look at her relationship with the male members of the family, and that is a theme throughout. But it's also about her mental health, and this whole idea of her wanting to become a plant is quite an interesting one that, like I said, it just took the story into a different direction than what I was thinking. But I did like this book. And our fifth book in my top 5 weird books is The Female Man by Joanna Russ. This one is from 1975. I think it may have been written a bit earlier and then not published for a few years, maybe. This one was just really confusing. So it is a sci-fi book, and it is one of the sci-fi masterworks that they have, so it's, I guess, supposed to be considered like a classic or something. And I just thought it was interesting as well to get a sci-fi book that was written by a female author, because you don't see them anywhere near as often, especially not ones that are like marked up as you know, being worth reading on masterworks. So this book is about 4 different women who live in very different worlds, but they are, I guess, very similar women also, and they live in kind of like parallel universes to each other. So Janine lives in New York, but the Great Depression never ended and World War II never happened, so there's also not been any serious feminist movements or events happening. Janie, if I get the names right, Janie lives on While Away, which is like Earth, but 10 centuries into the future, after all the men have died of a plague and the women have figured out how to reproduce without them. And Jael, if that's how you pronounce the name, J-A-E-L, Jael, lives on or in Womanland, where men and women are in a literal war with each other, but they also simultaneously trade for resources. For example, women will trade their male children to get resources from the men. I think Womanland, which doesn't actually appear until later on in the book, is in some ways the most interesting if you want to think about our current status quo and then exaggerate that much further. So it's a literal war of the sexes, only we still have to have some kind of working relationship, so they still trade for resources and engage with each other in a non-violent way. That's kind of interesting, but by that point in the book I think I'd slightly checked out because it was really confusing me. And then there's Joanna, who is living in a world much like ours, although ours set in like the late 1960s, early 1970s, whenever Joanna Russ wrote the book. Obviously, she shares the name with the character, which may seem like she identifies with that character the most. But it's that Joanna character who is the female man of the... I don't know why I'm doing this a lot. Well, he's the female man of the title. This one to me seemed like the most regressive, or just a bit odd. I think this is where I really struggled to understand the point of the book, perhaps, because she has had to become a female man, where she is still a woman or female in her body, but she has the mind of a man, and that's what she has had to do to, I don't know, survive or succeed. It just seems like quite an out-of-date idea now, because you have to have quite a fixed idea about masculinity and femininity, or like what it means to be a man. Like, what is a man's mind anyway? Like, it just raises a lot of questions. And I mean, you could say, well, maybe that's the point, but I just wonder if perhaps if this book was written now, then it would be the Joanna character who would be quite... So my main problem with this book was actually just that I found it really confusing. I didn't know what was going on or who was talking, which character we were looking at most of the time, which I think is part of the point, but my brain just clearly couldn't take it all in. Anyway, let me know what you think of this one. Let me know what you think of all 5 of these weird books, whether you actually think that they're weird or not, whether you think that they were good or interesting or not. Just, yeah, let me know in the comments. Give me a like and a subscribe for more of these videos.